Wonderful to see you here. Thanks for coming. Welcome to Champlain College. My name's David Finney. For the next 90 days, I've got the best job in Vermont. I'm the president of this college, and it's an honor to see you here and to have you here with us this evening. It is my pleasure to introduce Brian David Johnson tonight. Brian's been on campus these past 2 days, and he's pretty close to becoming an honorary Champlainer. A quote I heard recently about some of what Brian does has stuck with me. In our lifetimes, the rate of change will never be slower. Now, if you are a futurist like Brian, this may present something of a challenge. Brian is the chief futurist at Intel Corporation. His work focuses on developing an actionable vision for computing in 2020. His work is called future casting, using field studies, technology, research trend data, and science fiction to provide Intel with a vision of consumers and computing. He's been pioneering development in artificial intelligence, robotics, and using science fiction as a design tool. Through Intel's 21st Century Robot Initiative, he has helped create the Jimmy robot, an open source robot that can be printed on a 3D printer, and programmed to do whatever you might like, except pick cherries. It is this type of creative ingenuity we hope to develop through our own Champlain College Maker Lab, which Brian had a chance to visit earlier today. In addition, he's visited several classrooms, he's toured our Emergent Media Center, he's spoken to 6th grade students at Mater Christi School, and most importantly, he has engaged faculty, staff, students, alumni, and trustees and community members in conversations about the future of technology and its impact on education. In this and many other ways, Champlain continues its partnership in the local creative economy as we work to foster the educated imagination on campus and in the community. We've had a wonderful time with Brian over these past few days. I know that we're at the beginning of a long and dynamic relationship with Intel. It is an honor, a treat, and a pleasure to welcome him here tonight. Let's give him a warm Vermont welcome.
Hello, everybody. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the future, and very specifically, how to change the future. As a futurist, it's something that I take very seriously, and it's something that I've been talking to students and faculty and folks all over Champlain, and I was very lucky also to talk to the class of school students today. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about just what I do. Those of you I didn't meet, I want to tell you a little bit about why Intel has a futurist, what a futurist is, what I do, and then also what I see coming. And then very specifically talk to you a bit about how you can actually go about changing the future. But before I start, I want to thank some folks. And it was very funny today, and I'm not sure if this member of the press is here, but I was talking to the press today, and so we were chit-chatting, and they said, oh, what brings you to Champlain College? Is this your first time in Vermont? I said, yeah, it's my first time in Vermont, my first time in Burlington. Like, well, what brings you to Champlain College? And I said, Danny. And they kind of looked at me and sort of cocked my head, and I was like, well, yeah, Danielle Hertz. And they kind of looked at me, and I was like, oh yeah, as a family friend of ours, the Hertz family is a dear friend of ours, and I was speaking to their daughter one night over dinner. Danny, stand up, Danny. She is the reason I am here, because I was talking about robots and the future and all this cool stuff, and she's just sitting there looking at me, and she's like, you need to come to my college. I was like, okay, sure. And anybody who knows, like, I'm like this all the time. Like, we could be standing out in the hall or up here. I'm like this all the time. And she goes, you need to come to my school. And I'm like, okay, I'll come to your school. You know, hook me up with the people. And she told me about Champlain. I was like, wow, that's great. And then I started talking to different people. I was like, wow, these people are pretty cool. And they're like, will you come out? I'm like, well, of course I come out. You're pretty cool. And you are. Like, for real. Give yourself a round of applause. This is like a really awesome place. And so it might be because he's leaving, but a lot of people are saying a lot of really good things about Dave Finney, and I really want to thank him. His hospitality and the conversations that we've had have just been amazing. So you might know him as President David Finney. I know him as Davey Short-Timer. And you need to watch your Post-it notes. I wasn't even going to leave my coat because I was worried that he was going to make off with my coat, so watch your stuff. I already know they're numbering the pens in the president's office, just so you know. I also want to thank the Generator community. The community of makers and this growth of the creative economy here in Vermont is amazing. It is something that is real, and it is something that is special, and it's something that, in the conversations that I've had with folks and the people that I've met, it's something that we're going to continue to do. And so you are in a very special place at a very special time. And it's really, really fascinating to watch me and watch other people see where this might go. I also need to thank a couple of gentlemen who, when I was learning how cool this college was, I would have conversations. I would have conversations with Ken and Eric. And Ken and Eric would call, and we'd just talk. Like literally, we'd just chit-chat. And we would BS, and we would talk about the future, and talk about this, and design, and generate, and where things are going. And we really hit it off. So the first person I really want to thank is I want to thank Ken. Where are you, Ken? There he is, Ken Howell. From the Emergent Media Center and the Makerspace. If you haven't seen the Makerspace, I know it was opened on Saturday, and we had a little bit of open house today. You got to go see it. It's going to be really cool and a lot of stuff. And the last person I need to thank is the tall man usually at the back of the room, and he's right there. He's always at the back of the room. My man, Eric Oliver. Eric has been gracious enough to be my handler. And if you've ever do what I do, you usually have a handler. And you can see if anything goes wrong or anybody makes a sudden move, you'll see I will look at him. Also, when time starts going long, you'll see him start to fidget and start going. He'll do this. He'll start tapping, which I now have a Pavlovian response. I might just leave. Because I've learned to do what Eric tells me to do. Because everything has gone awesome. Everything has gone flawless under Eric's guidance, and also everything that has happened here. All right, let's get started. So, let's talk about how to change the future. If you look at my first slide and you read it very closely, you will see it says, I work for a large company and we have a lot of lawyers. Okay, great, you saw that, right? I did that. Oh, I got to tell you something. So what lawyer, do we have any lawyers in the house? I like lawyers, by the way. Anybody? Any lawyers? No, come on. You? So what most lawyers will tell you is that the longer your disclaimer has to be, the better you're doing. That you're kind of dangerous. Yeah, she's not in your head. That it's this idea that you might actually say something that's quite dangerous. I'm also going to set my alarm to make sure that we have time for questions. So start thinking about questions, because we're going to leave like a good bit of time so that you can literally ask me anything. It's a game that we've played these last 2 days. And I got to tell you, you've been so polite here. Like I literally say, ask me anything. And everybody kind of looks down. I'm like, I'm here, I'm a futurist, you can ask me anything at all, and everybody kind of looks down. So you can ask me anything. Literally, it's kind of fun. So you can start thinking now of what that might look like. Okay, who am I? So as Dave said, I'm Brian David Johnson, I'm Intel's futurist. So it's my job to look 10 to 15 years out and model how people will act and interact with technology in the future. Now that might sound a little bit like science fiction, but it's actually pragmatic, because at Intel, right, the chip company, it takes about 5 to 10 years to design, develop, and deploy the chip. So it's of vital business importance today for Intel to know what people want to do 10 years from now. I'm a principal engineer at the company. Basically, I deliver a spec that says, this is what people will want to do 10 years from now so that I can work with my colleagues in hardware and software and in legal and in IP to begin to bring that about. I'm a very, very pragmatic futurist. It's my job to say, here's a vision for the future, and to say, what are the actionable steps that we need to take today to get to that future? And I'll talk to you a little bit more about how I do that and what that's like. I have kind of a dual background, which actually won't surprise a lot of the folks here at Champlain, is that I'm kind of part engineer and part designer. I'm a writer and a filmmaker, but also I do code and I'm a system architect. So it's this idea of sort of developing a vision for the future based on research and then having the ability to communicate it. But you can pretty much tell everything you need to know about me by looking at this picture. Let me clarify. The tall, bald one is me. The small, good-looking one is Arthur. I labeled them so you wouldn't sort of get confused. Now, Arthur was the first robot ever created at the University of Essex Robotics Lab. I do a lot of work in robotics and in artificial intelligence, but as I said, you can pretty much tell everything you need to know about me by looking at this picture, evidenced by the fact that I went all the way to England and had my picture taken with a 25-year-old robot, and I'm very happy about it. You can rest assured, I am a geek. I am a huge geek, I am a huge nerd, I am unabashed in my love of science and science fiction and engineering and the collision of those two worlds, because where those two worlds collide is where awesome happens. Good night, everybody! Wow, that's great. That's the first time that's ever happened. Wow, you guys really are cool. And so, in my background, now that you've been so nice, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. So I'm born of geeks. My dad was a radar tracking engineer, and my mom was a IT specialist. My parents were geeks before they called them geeks. My parents are OG, original geeks. They are so geeky, they don't even know it. Like, I tell my mom, I'm like, Mom, I talk about you, about a geek and stuff like that, and she's like, yeah, honey, that's great. What my mom used to say to me, right, as I tell people a lot, we learn so much from our parents and our moms and our dads, and what my parents used to say was, make sure you eat your vegetables, make sure you do your homework, make sure you, get some sleep, and make sure you unplug the soldering iron. It's sort of how I was raised. And so I was not only born of a geek, but I was sort of raised to be a futurist in the way that for me, there was never any difference between engineering and creativity. That some of the most creative people I know are engineers, and some of the most technically minded people I know are artists. And to me, this just seems preposterous. And so this is one of the things, now because you clapped for me, like when people say that oh, I'm not creative, I'm an engineer, or no, I could never understand this stuff. I busted some poor lady's chops when she said that coding was hard. Is she here? The poor thing. It was awful. She is here. Thank you so much. You were so nice. She said, well, coding, it's in the MFA program, and she was showing this sort of awesome work that she's doing around autism and things like that. And I said, well, how's it going? And she goes, well, the coding's hard. And I hate this word. And I was like, is it hard, or is it just new? And then Ken did a great job. He's like, you've just been coding for 14 weeks, and you've actually written code. She goes, I guess it's just new. And then I told her very quickly, I'm like, and now you need to go find a bunch of 8-year-old young ladies and tell them your story. Because we need more ladies coding, but we also need to dispel this vision. Thank you. But it's true, and I'll hold you to it. They were so nice. Literally, all the students were super nice to me, because I'm always like this. Okay. So in my job, we need to have a vision for the future. You have to have a vision for the future. And only by having that vision can you go about and build things. Literally, nothing amazing was ever built by human beings that was not imagined first. So usually, when people have visions for the future, and I'm not sure the folks over there can see. Can you see this over here? Good? Here, I'll turn it a little bit. There we go. And the AV guys are like, oh! This is usually what we're shown when people show us visions of the future, right? You have this really good-looking guy or really good-looking girl. You've got like this really awesome, cool, streamlined piece of technology, and they're in a really ultra-modern, hip sort of apartment, right? This is what we see in movies. It's what we see in advertising. It's what we see when people show us visions of the future. I have to tell you, I hate this picture. I absolutely hate it. Because when I look at this picture, if we are going about the serious business of actually building the future, when I look at this picture, I ask myself, where are the baby toys? If this is supposed to be a vision for the future, I ask myself, where are the family photos? I ask myself, where are the pillows? Right? Where's the stuff? Right? That's the wonderful thing about human beings is we're complicated and we're weird and we've got different beliefs and we have different religions and we have different opinions, and that diversity is what makes us wonderful. So when I look at this and we're really talking about having a vision for the future, at best I find this intellectually dishonest. And at worst, I find it insulting. I find it insulting to the complexity and amazing things that come from human beings. Now, I can say that I hate this picture because this picture comes from Intel, my company, which doesn't make me a lot of friends in the marketing department, just so you know. Now, on my next slide, I have a picture of what the future is actually going to look like. We're like 3 slides in, people, and I am actually going to show you what the future is actually going to look like. Who wants to see it? There we go. That's a little bit more. Give me one more time. Who wants to see the future? There we go. See, because I spent a lot of time on the road, and I spent a lot of time in front of audiences talking to people, and I was showing this one point in front of about an audience of about 600 undergraduate engineering students. Where are my geeks at? Do we have any other engineering students in here? Any? Nice. The hardest audience in the world, just so you know, like just nothing. You get nothing. And so I'm there, and I'm Intel's Futurist, and I'm talking about the future, and I'm like, who wants to see the future? And it's completely silent. And I'm like, come on, people. And one guy way in the back goes, sure. I'm like, I travel all the way here, and all I get is, sure. Okay, hold on to something. Literally, your life is going to be changed. Like, mark it in your mind right now. The difference between right now and what is going to happen in the next, depending upon how long I talk, 5, 10 seconds. You ready? Right. Bam! Let it sink in. Now, this actually comes from a piece of social science research that we've done in my lab, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But the reason why I love this picture is it's full of stuff, right? She's got stuff on the chest of drawers. The chest of drawers is open. She's in her bare feet. By the way, there's full of technology and full of screens. She's got a connected laptop, a connected smartphone, a connected TV, even a connected picture frame. There's tons of technology. There's more technology in this picture than in the previous picture. So technically, by mass and volume, there's more future in this than in the previous one. But what I love about it is it's real. It's full of stuff. It's full of the things that make her comfortable and the things that make us comfortable. It shows the complexity of human beings. And so as I start to envision these futures, these are the types of visions that I try to have. These are the ways that I try to envision the future. I want to design and build a future that's made for people, that's actually built for real human beings all over the world. This is the type of future I want to live in. I don't want to live in a future that looks like this, because this looks like prison. I have another question. Any science fiction fans? Anybody ever seen a science fiction movie? Come on, keep them up. Anybody know a science fiction fan? Anybody sitting next to a science fiction fan? Anybody looking at a science fiction fan on stage? Come on, Dave Shorttimer, let's do it. You still got the best job, but you still got work to do, young man. Why is everybody bald in the future? No, seriously, like go and look at like THX and all these other movies. Everybody's bald in the future, which works for me. But actually, no, we want people like this. We want it to be complicated. We want it to be full of people, right? We want to design things that embrace the complexity of who we are. So how do we do that? So we have to have a process for doing it. How do we come up with an actionable vision for the future? So the first thing that I'll tell you, if you remember nothing else about my presentation tonight, is remember I do not make predictions. Invariably, somebody in the Q&A this evening is going to ask me what Intel's stock price is going to be. I don't know. Someone also asked me earlier who is going to win the World Series. I don't know. Go Giants. I don't know. Also Yankees, because I married into a Yankee fan, but I don't know. Go Yanks! I got lots of teams. The thing about predictions is that when people make predictions, they're usually trying to sell you something. I don't want to be the person who said I was right. Like, I got it right. Here's the thing. I said this thing. You turn on any show or anybody who's talking about the future, and they will say, I said this thing, and in 5 years' time, it happened. Ooh, isn't he great? That doesn't matter. It's my job and my responsibility to get it right. It is my responsibility to come up with these visions for the future and then be able to turn those into meaningful products that touch the lives of people and actually make their lives better. And that's what my process is all about. That's what this future casting process of what I do is all about. It is a process based on human beings first and foremost. So I have social scientists who work in my lab and have been studying actual human beings all over the world. Not demographics, not markets, not countries or BRIC or any of these different things. They study actual human beings. How do they live? How do they shop? How do they die? How do they fall in love? Like, what do people actually do? And from that, we take that information of the complexity of human beings and start to build it out. And mix it with technology, and mix it with some trend data, and mix it with some global interviews that I do. And ultimately, we model what it will feel like to be a human and live in the future. And really what we do is we use this process to figure out what's necessary to get there. We sort of look at this vision of the future and we say, based upon all these inputs, we roughly think the future is moving in this direction, and this is the future that we want, and this is the future that we want to avoid. And then we say, what are the steps that we need to take today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now to get to that future that we want and to avoid that future we don't want? Now, I also had to include, again, being an unabashed geek and nerd, a quote from Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer and the nonfiction writer. He was actually the great explainer. And I use this quote with my students. I'm actually a professor, and I teach foresight. I teach foresight in an MBA program and in an engineering program. And I tell people, if you want to be a futurist, you want to know what it's like to be a futurist, this is what it is. You can't read this over here, so I'll read it out loud. Predicting the future is a hopeless, thankless task, with ridicule to begin with and all too often scorn to end with. Who wants to be a futurist? Yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, yeah, I still want to be a futurist. So, where do we see things going? So in this work that I've been doing, I've been at Intel for 12 years. Where do we see things going? This fact that I have up on the screen changed my view of the future, radically changed my view of the future. So what it says, in a nutshell, is that as we approach the year 2020, the size of meaningful computational power, the size of the chips that go into our smartphones and our devices and our TVs, the size of those chips begin to approach zero. So right now we're at 14 nanometers in size. As we approach the year 2020, we get down to 5 nanometers. 5 nanometers is 12 atoms across. It's almost invisible. This changes everything because for decades we had to ask ourselves a very specific question when it came to technology development. And this fact changes that question completely. So if you look back with the PC, we had to say, well, can we take a PC and make it small enough to fit onto somebody's lap? Can we make a laptop small enough to fit into somebody's pocket or their pocketbook? Can we do it? But when you have the size of meaningful computational power approaching zero, you don't have to ask, can we do it? Because we can turn anything into a computer. We could turn this podium into a computer. We could turn this jacket into a computer. We could even turn my body into a computer. So it fundamentally changes the question of not only the technology we build, but the designs that we come up with, the businesses that we build, even the schools, and how we educate people. We don't ask ourselves, can we do it anymore? We ask ourselves, what? What do you want to do? Because you can do anything. What do you want to do? And more importantly, why? Why do you want to do it? And it's a question I don't think we ask ourselves enough, and it's a dialogue we don't have enough. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. As we said, I travel quite a bit and talk to a lot of people. I can tell you the world is split into 2 very different groups. When I tell people that someday you might put a chip in your body, there's 2 groups. There's one group that gets freaked out. There's another group that passes me their business card and wants to know how to get on the list. Never the twain shall meet. Literally. Now, for me, I ask, well, why? Why would you put a chip in your body? Well, the fact of the matter is people are doing it today. You have paraplegics and quadriplegics who put chips in their brain so that they can interface with a computer, dramatically making their lives better. Now, I'd also have to tell you, I love this, this picture, and unfortunately you guys can't see it here, so I'll tell you in a minute. I don't know if you can see, so this is new to me. Can you see that the woman in the 1960s got a bouffant hairdo? Can you see the dude in the 1970s got flares on? For those of you, oh, by the way, flares are bell bottoms. They are strange pants that we wore back in the 1970s, sort of filling people in. Can anybody down here figure out who it is depicted in 2010? Thus proving that you are smarter than I am. Because I had this for like a month or so, and I'm going around the world talking to people about stuff. I was literally on stage in front of 1,000 futurists. And I'm standing there and somebody said, oh, that's Steve Jobs. I'm like, huh, that is Steve Jobs. So I called the graphics team, right? Because they had sent it to me, and I was like, did you know that that's Steve Jobs? And they're like, yeah, it took you like weeks to figure it out. And then they did what they love to do. They went, futurist, boom, and hung up. Okay, so what are we seeing? Where are things going? What will it feel like to step out in the future, to look at 2023, 2024? What would it feel like to live in the future? So I think we've all heard about big data, right? There's a lot of talk about big data. And I play a game with that. If anybody starts talking to you about big data, ask them about big data. Say, well, what about big data? And what they will tell you is that it's big. Okay, granted. And then you go and you ask them a little more and say, well, what else about big data? They will tell you there is a lot of it. And you begin to find out there's not really a there when people are talking about it. And so I ask people, well, what will it feel like to be a human and live in this era of big data? Because it is happening. Literally, we as human beings today are like fire hydrants of data. We are spewing off our social networking information, our location, our Fitbit information, our preferences. We literally, it's just spewing it out. One of my social science says we are like big exhaust pipes of data, which I think is sort of sad and fascinating to think about exhaust pipes of data. But what will happen is all of this data will go up into the cloud, and you'll have algorithms talking to algorithms. You'll have machines talking to machines. It will feel like data has a life of its own, like it has a secret life, because it will. It will have a secret life. And this is a good thing. This is a very good thing. We will be able to make people healthier, more productive. We'll entertain them more when it's going out there and doing all of this work. But the thing that I tell my colleagues and the thing that I tell everybody that I talk to is, that's a great thing, the secret life of data, but it's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless until it comes down and touches the lives of people. That all those ones and zeros are just completely, completely meaningless. That it has to come down and touch the lives of people and make their lives better. And that is our charge. That is the thing that we should try to do. And so that has really deep implications for the applications that we build. We need to ask ourselves, who is going to use this, and how are they going to use this, and where are they? The people who are programming and designing these applications when it comes to big data have to have an understanding of what people will do with it and why they will do it. And we're beginning to see that play out now. We're beginning to see it play out now with privacy and security and who owns the rights to that. And these are conversations that we have to have, because it's the human impact that is the most important thing. One of the things that I have told some folks who were doing big data work, as I said, it would be a shame, and I think it would be shameful if we used all of this intelligence and all of this big data and all of this computational power, and the only thing we used it to do was sell more music. Shameful. If we only use it to sell more books and sell more stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. I work in commerce, right? There's nothing wrong with stuff. I'm a geek. I love stuff, right? But that's not good enough. We need to set the bar high enough. How do we use all of this data and all of this intelligence to touch the lives of that 83-year-old woman who lives in Tampa, Florida, who has type 1 diabetes and a history of heart disease? That's what we need to do. We can sell her stuff, too, but how do we help her? Because we need to be specific. It's about real people. So the next thing that I've been looking at is this notion of the ghost of computing. And the ghost of computing kind of riffs off compute moving to zero, right? Compute keeps getting smaller and smaller. So that as we move into 2023, 2024, something really interesting happens. The fulcrum point of where computation resides. So what I mean by that is right now we live in a world of devices. We live in a world of screens, right? Things like that. I even wrote a book called Screen Future, right? It's all about screens, and our compute lives here. But as compute moves to zero, we pass this fulcrum point where computational power begins to move into our environment, where we will have more computational power in our buildings, more computational power in our cities, in our cars. Where the compute resides is different. So what that means is that we'll move from a very different world. So this is the world that we have today, a bunch of screens. So as compute moves to 0, something really interesting happens. Okay, I want you to get ready for it because all the money went into this special effect. Are you ready? So something happens, something really amazing happens as we move from this world of screens and compute moves and turns into a ghost. All of those screens disappear. Yeah, you're going to need to do more than that because that's as good as it gets, people. Right there. So you know, we're at the top. I'll show it to you one more time. So something really amazing happens when the compute moves outside. The compute and the screens disappear. There we go. I am a ham, that's for sure. So now, I'm not saying that these go away. Don't get me wrong. These actually become more important. The screens that we are interacting with become more important because these become the windows through which we act and interact with all of that intelligence. So all of that big data, all of that secret life of data, this, in sort of geek nerd speak, this is called I/O, input, output. These devices become really, really important, but how we architect those devices, the businesses that we build, the communities that we build up will look very, very different. Because we're no longer living in a world of screens, we're living in a world where it's this sort of ghost of computing, and we're literally surrounded by it. Now the final piece before we start to wrap up, so we're kind of getting near the end, not completely near the end, but again, remember, you can ask me anything. Getting near the end. So as I go around and I talk to people, and I talk about things like compute moving to 0, and the secret life of data, and the ghost of computing, I very quickly learned that I seem to scare the heck out of people. I don't want to scare the heck out of people. I like people. So what I found is as I talk to people, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear of the future. And this is a problem. The reason why is that when your brain is on fear, when your brain is fearful, it looks really different. Like the part that lights up in your brain looks very different than when you feel safe and secure. And when you're frightened, you can basically make 3 decisions. Fight, flight, or freeze. That's it. And this is a very, very bad thing when it comes to making policy decisions, when it comes to coming up with education decisions. It becomes very dangerous and very worrisome. So I sort of kind of went at fear, and I can tell you the best way that has had it described to me from one of the brain scientists that I worked with said that, Brian, fear makes you stupid. So I said, well, okay, let's try to figure it out. Let's go after it. You know, what should we be afraid of and what shouldn't we be afraid of? And so I started asking people about, what are you afraid of and what are you frightened of? And some really interesting things happened because a lot of times people are afraid of the wrong things. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with fear. Fear actually keeps us alive and it's something that's important, but I think we need to figure out what we should be afraid of and what we shouldn't be afraid of. There was a Time magazine poll that was done a few years ago that to me was a perfect example of this. So the way it was set up, there was a box, right? And on the box, on this axis, here I'll use this, it's easier. On this axis, you had things that you should be afraid of. So here's what you shouldn't be afraid of, here's what you really should be afraid of. On this axis, you had things of what people were afraid of and what people weren't afraid of. Right? So up here you had what people were super afraid of and they shouldn't be afraid of, and down here it's what nobody was afraid of and everybody really should be afraid of. Does anybody know what number 1 was that people were super scared of and they shouldn't be? Airline travel. Okay, pretty safe. But that's not the really good one. What was number 2? Who said it? Sharks! What? Sharks? Okay. Now, can anybody guess what nobody was frightened of, but everybody should be scared to death of? The thing that will kill 50% of us in this room. Heart disease. Heart disease. It ain't sexy. It's not sharks, that's for sure. Nobody really made a horror movie about heart disease. Heart disease 2, the attack comes back. They should. So it's kind of silly, right? And I make light of it because we do, again, humor's good, but we do need to have those conversations. And a lot of the conversations that we have around people's fears of technology usually aren't technological problems. They're usually cultural problems. I had a lot of conversations, a lot of really amazing conversations when I was here at Champlain, talking to people about that, around what they were worried about and where their anxieties lay. And we can get into that in the Q&A if you want. But that idea of saying, let's make sure we're frightened of the right things, and let's focus on what is worrying us. And most of the time, it actually isn't a technological problem, it's a cultural problem. It's actually, much like that Secret Life of Data, it's about people. It's always about people and about culture and the conversations that we're having. So we have found ourselves in a really interesting time, I think, in our history. That with this idea of compute moving to zero, with the idea that we'll have a secret life of data, that data will go off and do things for us, that literally will be surrounded by computational power, we are truly living in a time where science and engineering have progressed to the point where what we build is only constrained by the limits of our imagination. Think about that for a second. Right? What we're saying is the thing that holds us back is not our science and technology, not our science and engineering, that we have that. At Intel, we say that's just engineering, right? We can do that. I look at you. It's just engineering. But the thing that is holding us back is our imagination, right? We need to be able to imagine a far different future. And I would push you to say the thing that holds us back is our ability to imagine a far more awesome future than we think we are going to have. Because you'll find, if you haven't figured it out yet, that I am an optimist. It is probably the most radical thing I've done as a futurist, to actually declare myself an optimist. I believe the future is made every day by people. That the future isn't some fixed point out there that we're running towards doing, we're helpless to do anything about. The future doesn't just happen, it's not an accident. The future is built by people. It's built by people, it is built by organizations, it is built by schools and corporations. That people shape the future. And we have to imagine that future. So one of the things that makes me an optimist, I say, well, if the future is built every day by the actions of people, why wouldn't you be an optimist? Let's build an awesome future. Let's not build a future that sucks. Let's do that, right? Why would you build a bad future? That's just weird. Let's build an awesome future. Like, let's go out and figure out what we want. And that is one of the things that I sort of would challenge you, and especially at a place like Champlain, is to be able to go and think about what is that future you want, what is that future you want to avoid, and start talking about it. And so, as a part of that, and we had a bit of a logistical snafu. I was going to have an Oprah moment, where everybody gets a book. Actually, usually what people say is, do I get a car? That means you're just much politer. Usually everybody's like, how about a weekend in like Australia? Because that happened. One of the things that I do is sort of write this stuff down, all the stuff that I'm talking about. And one of the ways that I hold myself accountable is write this stuff down. And as you saw there were some books as you were coming in. There's going to be more coming, and we'll figure out the logistics to put any of these books in your hands. But this idea of being able to use our imagination is incredibly important, and that's one of the reasons why I use these. So one of the key tools that I use in the development of the future is science fiction, right? The idea of using science fiction based on science fact as a way to prototype the future, to kind of think about where things might be going. Because any good story, any good movie, any good comic book is about humans, it's about people. So a good science fiction story based on science fact is still about humans. It's still about people. It allows us to imagine possible futures and the human impact and the cultural impact, the legal impact of where things are going. It also allows us to go to dark places, right? It allows us the freedom to imagine what could go terribly, terribly wrong. And it's something that I think we need to do. I don't think we do it enough. At Intel, the spec I told you, as a principal engineer, the spec that I write usually has 2 to 3 science fiction stories in it. And some of those science fiction stories are really, really dark, because I think it's our duty to go to those dark places. And a lot of the time, we can't stop it. Like, you can't actually build technology to the point that, that it can't do something. I think an example that I like to use is, a hammer. Right? A hammer is a tool. Technology is just a tool. You can't build a hammer sufficient enough to drive a nail that is also not sufficient enough to bash somebody's head in. You can't do it. But the good news is we've got things, we've got laws, we've got culture that say hammering a nail, good. Bashing in a head, bad. And again, that's where I always look at people. We're incredibly resilient, and we have lots of systems that allow us to actually control the machines and the technologies that we build. So that's one of the things that we use is science fiction to think about that. One of the things also that we've been looking at and digging at in this future of fear is looking at greed. Looking at the future of greed. I've written a book that some of you might have called Humanity and the Machine that looks at the intersection between culture and technology and where it's going in the future. And this is a series, actually, that we're working on. And the first thing we looked at was greed. We looked at financial systems, and we looked at high-frequency trading. To look at high-frequency trading as an example of the secret life of data going off and doing things. High-frequency trading is an example of data sometimes doing good things and sometimes doing really, really bad things. And so we started looking at it to say, what is it like? How is that happening? How do we get to that future that we want? And what we learned is that it's actually still about people. People are the ones who are programming those algorithms. People are the ones who are in control. Even if they're going off and doing things, we tell them what to do. And it came down to a really pivotal question about what are you optimizing for? And why are you doing it? And that is a very important question for us to ask ourselves. One of the other things that we've done a lot of work in is steampunk. If you don't know, who knows what steampunk is? Yeah, this is my kind of crowd. So it's awesome. Have I got a book for you? Who doesn't know what steampunk is? Have I got a book for you? Basically, steampunk is sort of retrofuturism. It's this sort of awesome playing out of playing with the past. And I wrote the book with a gentleman by the name of James H. Carrott, who's a cultural historian. So the beginning of the book literally starts out with a cultural historian and a futurist walk into a bar. And it happened like that. And ask, what can steampunk teach us about the future? Because what he said is that steampunk as a counterculture, as a culture, is kind of playing around with technology. It's not anti-technology. It's actually really positive about technology. And so what they're doing is you have a whole group of artists and writers and designers and musicians and you name it, that are going and making this sort of rich, rich culture. It's not anti-technology, but it's playing around with the past. And I said, wow, if steampunk's playing around with the past, doesn't that mean they want a different future? Like, oh. That was like the question. That was like one beer. And I was like, oh. And then that changed my life. That question changed my life because for the next 2 years, James and I traveled around the world, going into steampunk, literally journeying into steampunk. I came out alive, he came out of steampunk. He literally did. Like, you can watch through the book. The book is kind of written like this. It's very conversational. But you see the beginning of the book, and there's me, and I always look like this, right? And so but as James throughout it becomes more and more steampunk. It's like a flip book. He's like, when by the end of it, he's literally become a steampunk. He was from Seattle. He's moved to San Francisco and is like being the steampunk life. So I've lost my cultural historian to steampunk. But I got a book out of it. And so some of the other stuff as well, I got to say, more science fiction. One of the things, so there's this Tomorrow project, which is this thing that we do, which is science fiction based on science fact, is a way to get people to have conversations about the future. It's a way to say, let's write a science fiction story, make it out of a person in a place with a real problem, based upon real science, and then say, this is what I think about it, and then you can go share it with somebody. Right? You can think about the future and go share it with somebody. And so I'm not a synthetic biologist, but if I read a story about synthetic biology and I think about it, and I say, okay, and then I go up to somebody else, and are you a synthetic biologist? No. See, I have to ask, because I have audiences, 2 of them, no joking, who have actually said, yes, I'm a synthetic biologist. So what I do is I go, are you, sir, a synthetic biologist? Yeah, very good. So then what we can say is, I'm not a synthetic biologist, you're not a synthetic biologist, but if we read this story based on fact, we can have a conversation, a real informed conversation about synthetic biology and what freaks us out and what doesn't freak us out. That science fiction gives us a language to talk about the future. In the Tomorrow Project, I'm actually quite proud of and very humbled that it's something that's sponsored by Intel as well as other groups like Microsoft and Society for Science in the Public and Arizona State University and FIAP University down in Brazil. We've gone all over the world. We've gone to Germany, Brazil, China, And we've even launched last year a youth writing competition for young minds between the ages of 13 and 25. And we just closed it at the end of the year, and so we've got 300 entries. And it looks like we're going to have quite a few that we're going to publish out. So we went to these young folks and said, please tell us about the future. Tell us about the future you want, and tell us about the future you want to avoid, because it's our job to help you build it. You have to tell us. And so if the website's tomorrow-projects.com, I'm sure you all know how to Google, you can actually go there and everything's free. So all the stories are free, you can download them all. I give away books because we print out some books and they're free. Everybody keeps their copyright, the copyrights are theirs, we just want to get it out there to really generate this idea of talking about the future. And then also TV. So this goes on and on. We're always trying to go and think about what's the future of all these technologies and give books to people to have these conversations, to fuel your imagination so you can sort of talk about where things are going. We're getting close to the end. So, as a futurist, I take my job really seriously. I realize that if I do my job correctly, I can meaningfully touch the lives of almost anybody on the planet. Right? That is actually a stated goal of Intel, to meaningfully touch the lives of every human being on the planet. And what we've added in my lab is to meaningfully touch the lives of every person on the planet and make their lives better. It's literally in the conference rooms. So I take, as Intel's futurist, as the one who's sort of imagining these things for my company, I take my job really seriously, right? The future is built every day by the actions of people, so what are we going to do? Right? We can't punt. We're the ones who are going to do it, so what do we do? So I traveled around and I started talking to people, and I talked to government officials, I talked to folks in the military, I talked to other futurists, and we had this conversation about how do we change the future? What do we do? And I pissed a lot of people off. Like a lot of people. Like people would say, what makes Intel think that they need to build my future? I would say, oh, okay. Or they would say, what makes you as a futurist think you have say over my future? And I was like, nope, I understand all of that. But if the future is built every day by the actions of people, what do we do? What are the steps that we need to take? And it was only until I was in London and I was talking to Cory Doctorow. And Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author and an advocate. He's an activist. He has a vision for the future, and he uses his science fiction as a way to advocate for possible futures. And Cory is a long collaborator of mine and has written several stories and novellas for the Tomorrow Project. And so Cory and I were arguing about it, because if you know anybody, it seems people arguing, Cory loves to argue, and we're going back and forth, and we hit upon this idea. How you change the future is that the way that you change the future is you change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in. That simple. Incredibly powerful, though. Because if you can change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in, they will see the future very differently. They will take action very differently. They will interact with each other very differently. I've seen it happen. It's happened in my company. I've seen it happen at schools. I've seen it happen in organizations. That if we can change that story, you actually can change the future. And the way that you change that story is through conversations, is by talking to people, is by reading science fiction, doing research, all the sort of books that we've talked about, and even in the work that you do, and even being here at the college, is to say, this is the future I want, and this is the future I want to avoid. And you go to somebody else and you say, what's the future that you want? And hopefully you disagree. Because in that conflict is where you will find where the future actually is. Because the fact of the matter is, the future involves everybody. The future involves people you don't agree with. The future also involves people you don't like. But it involves everybody. And so, if we can go out and have those conversations, you can actually change the future. Now, I want to challenge you that you care. That's why you're here. That's why you're here in this room. That's why you're affiliated with the college. That you care about the future. More than most people. That why you came here tonight, and I was very serious about talking about how to change the future, that you care about that future, and that you want a different future, and that you don't want to be passive and just sit back and let it happen. So that's my challenge to you, that because you came here tonight, you're now implicated. You can't be passive. You have to have a vision for the future. You have to have an opinion. But more importantly, you have to do something about it. Everybody changes the future. It could be the future of your own personal life. It could be the future of your family, of your school, of your church, of your community, of your state, of your nation, of the world. But you have to decide. You have to decide, what is the future I want, and what am I going to do about it? Because you can't sit back. And my humble ask is that as you are forming these visions of the future, that you set the bar high enough. And that in that vision, the thing that you strive for is to make the lives of people better. Because if we can do that, if we can actually set our bar that high, what we can actually do is not only make good products, do good business, run a great school, have a good time, but if we set things high enough, we can actually not change the world, but we can not only do that, but we can also perceptively make every human being's life better. And I think that should be our goal. I have one more slide, and it takes a little bit of a story. All those questions, get them ready, get it going, get it going. Oh, and by the way, you got to wait for the microphone. I've been told I did my duty for the tech guys. You have to wait for the microphone. Okay, my last slide. When I was coming up in industry, I wrote speeches. This was before I was at Intel. I was very young. I wrote speeches for my executives. And I had one executive that in every single presentation that I had to write for him, I had to include a picture of dogs playing poker. No, really. A picture of dogs playing poker. I was young, I was new, I said, yes, sir. So I did it in every single right? You know the one I'm talking about, right? The dogs, you got the little bulldog, he's got the little thing. I know this picture really well. I spent a lot of time with this picture, and I got really good at it, right? So if it was like a screen, I would put it on the screen. If there was like a picture, I'd put like a dog playing, dogs playing poker in the picture. I got really good. Like every single presentation, a picture of dogs playing poker. So finally, it was kind of the end of my time with this executive, and I finally got up the guts to ask him. I was like, so sir, why did we have to include a picture of dogs playing poker in every single presentation that we make? And he kind of smiled at me and said, Brian, people love pictures of dogs playing poker. Why wouldn't you include pictures of dogs playing poker? And he was right. I have to give it to him. So I've taken on this tradition. I've taken on this mantle. But in every presentation I give, I don't put a picture of dogs playing poker. I put a picture of animals using technology. The longer you look at this, the more freaked out you are going to get. I guarantee you, some of the game designers in here are going, is that our new audience? Mom, guess what I'm doing at Champlain? What, designing games for cats? It was born tonight. So with that, I want to say, listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I've had just an amazing, amazing time here at Champlain. I think the work that you're doing here is really great, and I have really been welcomed into Burlington as well, and I'm really looking forward to my return. So thank you so much. Now it's time for Ask Me Anything. So if anybody has any questions, we've got about 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm going to really save time to actually do this. This is what I love doing. So the microphones are going to be going around. Just stand up, tell me your name and where you're from, and then ask me anything.
My name's Eric Nod, and I'm a local of Vermont.
Hey!
So my question to you is, I'm unsure if you can answer this, but out of all the three competitors in the PC market, Windows, Macintosh, or Apple, whatever you should call it, and Linux, which one of these is gonna win out in the end, in your opinion?
Really? That's the question you start with?
Yes.
It is a tough crowd. All of the above. No, seriously, all of the above. And the reason why I say that is this is an answer that infuriates my colleagues at Intel. Right? They'll say, Brian, should it be this or should it be that? Right? Which should it be? And I tell them yes. Because the thing that I'll tell people is that bet on choice. Choice always wins. That human beings like choice. We like to have different decisions. And a really great example, and you may not believe me, but a really great example is if you remember back when you had the iPhone, and the iPhone came out, and everybody loved the iPhone, everybody was going crazy. Oh my God, iPhone, 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 iPhone. And then Android came out, right? And I don't know if you guys remember, but I went back and did research. The reviews for Android were awful. I mean, awful. Like you would never want to get reviews like this. It didn't work, it was slow, it didn't have apps. But how they ended was, at least it's not Apple. Which is kind of funny. I mean, and that's the thing for me is that one of the things that I'm always kind of push for is to always bet on choice and to always bet on as much variety as possible. So in that way, I'm actually quite agnostic. I kind of want people to have whatever they want to have. And I actually think having multiple operating systems and multiple things is actually a very good thing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David, and I was wondering, what do you think makes a certain piece of new technology like VR successful?
David. So David asked, because we didn't have it turned up, he, by the way, did not make that weird noise. It'd be awesome if you did, though. The question was, what makes something like VR, a new technology, successful? And I actually think that's quite simple. That's actually a great question. If it solves a problem. Right? That's the question that I ask people. What problem are you solving? And actually it goes back to, are you making people's lives better? It's actually my bar. I'm really annoying when it gets to this. Like when people come and ask me about a new technology. Like a great example, which I've talked about a few times here with folks, is Google Glass. Google Glass came out and everybody was losing it. And especially, you're lucky to be here on the East Coast, but I tell you, in Silicon Valley, it was crazy. It was, it was like One Direction came to town. It was just, people were nuts. They're like, Google Glass! Did you like that? I even know who One Direction is. Yes. It's my 13-year-old mentors. They could have keep me up to date. And so the question I asked is, well, what problem is it solving, and how will people use this to make their lives better? Like, what is it doing? Now, don't get me wrong. I think stuff is cool, and I'm work in a lab, right? And I look at long lead technologies and think about things like that. So I think there's certainly benefit in it. Right? It's something that we've been working on for a very long time, is how do you blend the physical and the digital. It's really cool. And I went to one of my go-to audiences. And I can say this because there's a rich tradition of agriculture here in Vermont. I am the farm futurist. I know. Cool, right? No, seriously, I write for Successful Farming magazine. I'm literally known as the farm futurist. I came up with a different name. They thought farm futurist was great. I kind of think it's kind of funny. I love farmers. I love people who work in agriculture because they're some of the best engineers ever, and they don't know it. They're like the geekiest of the geeks, right? And the reason why is because they need to get work done. They need to get work done. And if it's not a good product, if it's not a good thing, they'll move on, right? It's all about getting stuff done. And the best review ever I heard of Google Glass was a farmer who said, it's like a smartphone you put on your face. Let's be clear, he's right? I mean, he was right. Now, great, now how does a smartphone stuck to your face help your life? Well, there is some ways, actually. There are some ways when it comes to, like, if machinery breaks down, you can go and get the schematics if you're out in the middle of the field. There's stuff like that. But that's my bar. And so I think when you define success, it's who are you defining success with, right? Again, are you defining success with those farmers? Are you defining it with the world? And for me, it's relative to the number of problems it's solving and the number of people whose lives it's touching and making their lives better. Now again, better could be healthier, it could be more productive, but also it could just be happier, right? It could be a screwy idea that's kind of funny. But I think you have to look at that, right? It's not just the quality and sort of geeking out on stuff, but how is it perceptively touching people's lives? Yeah, you gotta
I have a question.
Hi.
Sorry, that's really loud. So you talked a little bit about consumerism and how it relates to digital. I work in automotive web development, and we've seen a lot of controversy recently with Tesla and manufacturers selling straight to consumers. I'm interested from a digital perspective, how do you see the middleman being cut out when it comes manufacturer direct to consumer?
So wait a minute, this is a trick question, isn't it? Because you are, and I love it, I have to actually call you this. You're the middleman? Wow, look at the flaw in the English language. Any gender students? Anyway. Value. It goes back to value for me. I think we continue to see that. You see that in value chains, you see that in ecosystems, right? Whoever is in line in the ecosystem, so you have everything from design to manufacturing, to marketing, to deployment, to distribution, to sales and service, depending upon what you do. And in that whole chain, right, we call it a value chain. And it's who's defining the value and who's giving value. And I think a lot of times what we've seen over the years is the collapsing of the value chain because value begins to move, because technology affords us the ability to shift value to different places. I think a great example when you look at that is to look at the internet. And look what the internet did to airline travel and travel agents. It shifted. I mean, there are still some travel agents, but there are far few. And I'm not saying that travel agents didn't provide value, because some of them do and they are around, but as an industry, there was a shift because it allowed to take what they were very valuable at before and digitize that and put it into a website. So that's the thing that I would look at, is that if the manufacturers are moving directly to consumers, is that because they have completely collapsed the value chain, or are they sort of upping their value? Because really that's going back to the previous question, was where, what are the problems that you're solving? How are you making those people's lives better? How are you touching them? And I think that's what you can keep an eye on.
Hi, my name's Katrina. My question is more around.
So the thing that's like, is that so pause, because I can't hear the name, so all I hear is, and then the question. So go again.
Facing my fear. My name's Katrina.
Hi, Katrina.
Hi. My question is around what are you guys looking at in terms of the healthcare market? Because mobile health is becoming a bigger part of what I see in our future. And I just want to hear a little bit about what you guys are looking at. Or when you think about the future of healthcare, what do you think about?
We look at it in a couple different ways. We actually have a healthcare department. A colleague of mine by the name of Eric Dishman is a fellow. And if you Google him, he's amazing. Eric actually is a cancer survivor and has used the technologies at Intel to help his treatment. So Eric runs a team that looks at healthcare and looks at how we can use, right now he's looking at very specifically big data and data analysis around disease and treating cancer. So he heads up a team that does that, but that's such a small, I mean, it's a big part of it, but it's also a small part of it, right? There's lots of other areas. So we do have a group called the New Device Group, which is looking at how do you take devices that are smaller than the smartphone. So what comes after the smartphone, right? You've got desktop, you've got laptop, you've got tablet, you've got smartphone. What's next? And in some of those areas, what they're looking at is how can we use those devices, those new devices, again, to help care for people with healthcare. Because we, like most people, have seen that, right, we're going to have an increasing aging population all over the world, and that preventative health care is so much more important. So those are the two main areas. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ross. First of all, I want to say thanks for coming to Champlain. It's great. My question is, as a young student who's about to graduate, what steps could I take to get your job? Or a futurist in general.
I like the cut of your jib, young man. Well, a couple of different things. There's a different version of this that I actually have a slide to talk about literally my process and how we do it. And I say, if you want to steal my job, just take a picture, because they can do it. So unfortunately, I didn't leave that out, but if you come up, I'll show it to you. Actually, my job, there's more and more of my job actually out there. A lot of high-tech companies, a lot of pharma companies. I mean, my job and my job type actually came out of the energy industry. Any industry, so seriously, if you want to look for a job, first off, you can contact me. I'll give you my card. because I did make myself redundant. Oh, so yeah, at Intel, so in the technology sector, you could make me redundant too. Right, the biggest success is to make yourself redundant, right? You have redundant systems. I was Intel's first futurist. I was named their futurist, and there's a funny story about that, which I could tell you later if you want. But there are now 2. I am now redundant. What's cool is that he looks exactly like me. He really does. He's bald, and he dresses like this, except he has a British accent. And because of that, people think he's nicer than I am, which is great. But seriously, if you want to, you would look at places that need to make big bets. That's why I have a job. Literally, Intel needs to make decisions today on the factories and fabs that we're going to literally build, and those fabs cost billions of dollars. No pressure. Billions of dollars to get that ready. And so if you really want that, you can look to places that are making those bets. Energy companies, high-tech companies, pharma companies. Some cities actually have them, and governments have them as well. A lot of time, people won't call it futurism or futurists. Futurist is not really a title that you give to yourself. It's a weird thing to call yourself. It's usually something that gets stuck on you, like the Scarlet Letter. Like it's just like this thing, like somebody goes, futurist. Because most people are like, because usually, and no one has done this yet, when people usually go, okay, so you're a futurist, let me ask you this, right? You become a target. What they usually call it, in more polite circles, is long-term forecasting, strategic foresight. And if you literally Google that, you can keep an eye on it. And there's actually a lot of programs as well. Not that I'm saying you should go back to school, because I know it costs money, but there are different programs as well that you can actually kind of get spun up on that.
Hello, my name is Tina.
Hi, Tina.
My question has to do with what I call idea translation.
Idea translation.
Yes. So we have tools that help us translate one language to another, but people like yourself and many in this room, when we are trying to communicate obtuse ideas, we're trying to describe things that don't exist yet to people who perhaps don't think the same way. Do you have any tips on how to translate ideas to describe things that don't exist yet?
So I want you all to know I have not paid Tina any money. I haven't. We haven't met, right? Right? We haven't met. Nice to meet you, by the way. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. But it is like you kind of set it up. I'm serious. Science fiction. Seriously. Narrative. Not so much science fiction, but narrative. Human beings are inherently social, and the way that we relate to each other is through narrative. Whether it be the narrative of conversation or the idea of saying, here's this vision that I have for the future, but putting it in a way so that people have context. Because context is the thing that I think is incredibly important. That even in the job that I do, and a lot of times when we communicate ideas, we don't put it into context. We don't put it into narrative. Like a lot of people in the high-tech field will do something called scenarios or a day in the life or whatever. And what they're usually doing is these sort of bloodless, hairless things. And they don't have people in them. They don't have the complex wonderfulness that is a people. And so if you put it into a narrative, you put it into a context, you make it about a real person in a real place with a real problem, it gives it great context. And I'll give you a perfect example. By the way, you would hate to be one of my students. So what people do is they'll come to me and they'll write these things up. And they'll say, okay, I did a person in a place with a problem. By the way, the person is either them, their wife, or their kid. Their place is basically where they live. And their problem is usually something like email or something like that, right? Not that interesting. But what I say to them is, okay, fine. Now make it about a 16-year-old living in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And they're like, whoa, right? Everything, the context changes massively, right? Make it a 89-year-old grandmother, great-grandmother in Mumbai, India, right? How do we solve problems for people? This is one way that we can solve problems for people, is to literally put it in that context. And that becomes a really interesting tool. And I think narrative, whether it be science fiction or the science fiction prototyping, or just something that gives around it, because giving somebody the experience of the future is really important. And the bar that I set for a lot of my students, and I set for myself, is I say that you should be able to smell the future. Right? You should be able to describe the future in such a way that you know what it smells like. And for bonus points, you should be able to describe what the future tastes like. Because that's a little creepy, by the way. right? It's one thing, I did a thing on the future of food once, and it's one thing about writing science fiction stories about the future and giving it to somebody to read. It's something else altogether about saying, here's a science fiction story, something I came up with, put it in your mouth. People were like, whoa. So I think it's that, and then you're really sort of hit up with the future, and it makes it visceral. Thank you. Yeah, but can we also get to the wings over here? These poor people over here have had their hands up.
Hi, my name's Liam.
Hi, Liam.
I was wondering, what kind of future would you imagine if you didn't have the infrastructure to create this technology?
So you mean when we have resource scarcity?
Yes.
Well, I mean, part of that is part of the goal, right? We will have resource scarcity. I mean, part of resources are that they are scarce. No resources are abundant, right? I mean, especially when it comes to minerals, when it comes to fossil fuels, when it comes to all of that, it's not, right? And that's part of the modeling that we do. A lot of the modeling that we do in looking at these trends is to look at the breakdown of ecosystems, to look at the effects of things like climate change, to look at conflict minerals, to look at all these things that are out there and to say what effect do those things have. And we actually have conversations about that. And in that future casting thing, the process that I talked to you about, we have the social science, we have the technical data, we have trends, and we have this thing that I didn't get into too much, which I call data with an opinion, is we go out and I find people who don't agree with me, right? I find people who have differing opinions around resources, about scarcity, and actually listen to them and actually try to map to the middle, right? Because usually working in those extremes, when you find people who literally hate each other because they don't agree with each other, that's good, that's interesting. Not that they hate each other, but the fact that there's something in between there. And so we seek that out. And so that's actually a big part of the modeling that we do. I'm still an optimist, but I'm very pragmatic as well. And I think that we need to prepare for a lot of that.
Hey there. My name's Michael. My question is about AI, artificial intelligence, computers, robots. Just simply, do you think that will ever catch up with human intelligence or surpass it? Because not that I clearly haven't studied this as much as you have, but I've been into this stuff for a long time, and I've never really been sold on the idea that computers could ever challenge a human brain. But what do you think?
You know, that's not the question I thought you were going to ask me. It's really not. Because usually what people ask me, when we play Ask Me Anything, is when will the machines rise up and take over? That's actually what I thought you were going to say, and you said the exact opposite. Huh. I agree with you, actually, a lot. So when people talk about the singularity, right? So the singularity is the point at which machine intelligence surpasses human intelligence. The reason why it's called the technological singularity, it was actually first coined by a friend of mine, Werner Vinge, when he wrote it for NASA back in the early 90s. And the reason why he called it the singularity is he said that when machine intelligence surpasses human intelligence, it is past the point which we can see. He actually says, we don't know what's going to happen. That's very telling to me. Because you talk to a lot of people and they say, so because I can't see it, I believe that the machines will become our overlords. This is very telling, not about the machines, but about humans. Because often what happens when we think about that and when we say the word intelligence, because artificial intelligence is tricky, because I say, is it human intelligence you're talking about or intelligence? Right? And people get very worried about autonomous systems, and they get worried about what's going to happen. And I find out, who here has a dog? You have an autonomous system that lives in your house that could kill you in your sleep. You do. It's silly though, right? There's training, we know what to do. We're actually kind of good at this stuff, right? And so when we start thinking about autonomous systems, we need to define the intelligence. Now, I actually like that conversation when people are playing out their anxieties about human intelligence. That's like Frankenstein and things like that. But we have to take responsibility for it. That's actually the thing as a cautionary tale why Frankenstein is still, this amazing book written by this teenage girl, right? Because Frankenstein, and the Frankenstein problem is that human beings have hubris and we want to create something intelligent. We create something intelligent and then it rises up and kills us. That's like the story that gets told over and over and over again. Well, part of the reason, if you look at the story, that the monster tracks down Victor is because he doesn't take responsibility for it. He abandons it. He doesn't take responsibility for the technology. Granted, it's sewn together human corpses. We'll move past that. But he doesn't take responsibility. And I think that's a big thing as well, that we abdicate our responsibility if we say, oh, the machines are going to take over and be our overlords. I don't care. I don't need to do anything. And I find that actually quite dangerous. So yeah, for me, I think 10, 15, 20 years from now, oh, no, we're pretty good. It's actually, but my question, I think, which is more important, is what kind of intelligence do we want, and what would we want them to do for us?
Hi, my name's Jamie.
That was cool. Hey.
I'm from Berkeley, California, long way from home.
West Coast!
My question for you is, you mentioned that there are good futures ahead of us and bad futures ahead of us, and you tried to plan out the steps to get to the good futures, not the bad futures. What are some of those steps that we need to take to get to the good futures?
Well, the first thing is to base our visions of the future on facts, right? We need to look at facts and look at the reality of where things are going. And facts are tricky sometimes, right? But facts. And then the first thing is to have a vision, right? That's one of the things we need to ask people, what is the vision that you want, and what is the vision, what is that future you want to avoid? And I really think, I mean, it's amazing, and I would really ask you all to do it, is start talking to your friends and your family about that. Like, have that conversation. It is really fun. You go places where you never thought you would go before. Like, I had this conversation with my mom, and it got weird quick. In a good way. Because you're like, wow, Mom, you think that? Now, again, my mom's like a super nerd, but it's really interesting. And it sort of shows you things about the people that are around you that is really, really interesting. And so much of that's the problem, is the communication, is our ability to have that sort of shared imagination about where we're going. Because, I mean, human beings are incredible. We're incredibly industrious. We're incredibly curious. And I believe, especially with our technology now, that we can build anything. But we have to have that vision, and we have to talk to people about it. Thanks.
Hey, Brian. I'm Jake.
Hey, Jake.
I'm reading some literature recently that claims that economics is dying and that alchemy is on the rise. The alchemist equation states that wealth is physical resources multiplied by technology raised to the nth power, where nth is the exponential power of technology. Do you think that holds any value in your visions and insight for the future?
Holy cow. I didn't know there was going to be a quiz, Professor. No, that's a great question. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. Have I got a book for you? I don't know that. I mean, the idea of the death of economics, it sounds a little salacious to me. And again, I like a good story, don't get me wrong. But economics is just sort of, the study of markets. I mean, that's not going to die. Alchemy, that's just bad economics, right? That's opinion. That's men and women and people who sort of make predictions and tell you about where things are going. I do think, to be quite honest, and some of the stuff that has come out of my work here, I actually have a favorite economist, by the way. His name's Paul Thomas. He works actually at Intel. He's our chief economist. But Paul and I have these conversations. And it's fascinating because we start talking about things like GDP. And that's one of the things that I find very, very telling. Poor thing. She doesn't want to go. Who wants to leave the future? And what you should say is, by the way, the present is cranky. Sorry, back to the future of economics. We use GDP as a measure of success and progress. There's a lot of people who have shown very specifically that GDP is not a great measurement at all. Actually, when they created GDP, if you actually read the initial report, they say this should not be used for very long. So it's flawed. We know it's flawed. Everything in economics is flawed. We also know that everything is variable. I mean, that's the guys who won the Nobel Prize last year for economics basically showed that markets are completely irrational because, surprise, human beings are irrational. So in that way, that's the thing for me that sort of came out of this book, is that in the study with these economists, is that human beings are value-based systems. Now, my wife gives me a hard time because she says, honey, don't tell people that they're value-based systems. It makes you sound creepy. But we are. We are driven by values. We like to think that we are driven by data. And economists like to think that they're driven by data, but everybody's shown that that's not true. That's not bad, by the way. You also talk to Paul Thomas, and he talks about this in the book, where he says, human beings and markets and corporations are irrational. We like to think that we're built upon data and we make rational decisions, and the fact of the matter is we are completely qualitative. We are completely value-based. And I said to him, you said that out loud, and you said that I could quote you. He goes, yeah, you can go ahead and quote me. And he goes, and by the way, that's why we're so successful. That being completely data-driven isn't the way to do it. That it is this mix. It is sort of the messiness of our economics and what we do. I think a lot of what's going on in sort of the talk of what's happening with economics is a really good conversation because of what happened in 2008, what's happening with the recovery, what's happening with global markets, what's happening with China, what's happening with the EU. It's serious stuff. And so looking at it and saying, are we looking at the right measures? Is GDP right? Is goods right? Or should we be looking at more blended metrics? And there's some really interesting blended metrics out there. And that's one of the things I would have you take a look at. Because again, it's economics, the death of economics is not going to happen because you're just looking at markets, but it's how you look at the market. And that's the question that I end up asking in the book, and one that I find at least very clarifying for me is to say, when you're looking at economies or you're looking at markets or businesses, what are you optimizing for? GDP is optimizing for something very specific. What if you optimized for something else? I think it's a valuable question, and I don't think we have an answer yet. I think we have time for one more question. When we look. Eric says we have 5 minutes, so one, maybe two questions.
Yes? Oh, okay. Hi, Brian. I'm Dan. I run the 3D printing shop over by Ben & Jerry's. I was wondering, your first
That's a beautiful line, by the way. I own the 3D printing shop over by Ben & Jerry's.
It's a wonderful combination.
Imagine if 10 years ago, imagine if you were like 13 years old and you came up to your 13-year-old self and you're like, hey, dude, listen, you're going to own a 3D printing shop next to an ice cream store. You're like a rock star. Think about that for a minute.
It's not a bad job to have,
That's
I'll
right.
let you know.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So your first two slides, or pseudo first two slides, was the vision of the future with practically nothing in it and the vision of the future with all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Well, like the first one kind of reminded me of our shop because all of the stuff in our shop is completely digital until it's made.
Sure.
I was wondering if you could talk about that kind of transition between the digital and the physical and how, well, you guys are doing some cool stuff with 3D printing, so maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Well, first off, I would tell you, you need more pillows.
Point taken.
Like you need some pillows. Now, part of this is an aesthetic decision, right? I use this to kind of make a joke and make a point. And part of that is taste, right? Choice. So you can put in it what you want to put in it. For me, I think what's interesting about 3D printing is 3D printing is flattening out manufacturing in a really interesting way. And 3D printing is very new. It's incredibly new. It hasn't been around for very long. And what we print, how we print, where we print, what we make in additive manufacturing, right, which is it's additive manufacturing. It just doesn't sound as cool as 3D printing. But that's really what it is. And for me, the correlation that I look at is desktop printing. So desktop printing, a lot of people call it desktop manufacturing. If you think about the parallel between desktop printing, look at how desktop printing has changed things, and also look how it hasn't changed things. Right? We still have bookstores, we just have less. Part of that's also because of digital. We still have print shops, but we have less. You can still print things at home, but you also go to the local greeting card store and buy a greeting card sometimes, and sometimes you print it at home. Right? So I think you can begin to look at it, it spreads it out. So what are you going to manufacture and where are you going to manufacture? That sometimes you will manufacture it in your home. Sometimes people will come to your shop because they need it at a certain level. I think it gives an increased subtlety to the manufacturing process about where things are manufactured and how things are manufactured. But what I get really excited about is what are the implications for where things are designed and how things are designed. Because that's where the creativity comes from, that now we've had the ability to come and design things in very different places, that you have people, and we have it now, if you look at things like Thingiverse and you look at sort of the bedrock of 3D printing, you have lots of people all over the world designing really cool stuff and sharing it with each other, whereas 10 years ago, that was unheard of. And that was brought about by sort of this process. Now, one of the things I do have to say really quick is open source 3D printable robots. Boom. That's my next project. I'm doing 3D printable robots. So robots that we're giving away the files. They're open source files. You can design what you want your robot to look like. Every robot has a name because every robot is built by somebody. Everybody should build robots. And then we're having the mechatronics, you have to buy those from other people all over the world. And even the AI is open source. And the idea is that a robot should be like a smartphone with legs, that you should be able to download apps so that everybody should have a smartphone. And I think I'll use this as a way to wrap up. And this ties into your 3D printing thing. On this project, this 21st Century Robot project, which I think the spirit of this lives at Champlain, is that the dedication for this book, I literally just finished the book. The book comes out in May from Make, and we're launching it at the Maker Faire. They wanted me to do the dedication, and I take dedications really seriously. I mean, I take my job really seriously. So I was thinking about the dedication, and I said, I think I should dedicate this book to anybody born after the year 2014. And the reason why is that we now live in a time where we have an entire generation of young minds who have never known a time when there wasn't the internet. They have never known a time when you couldn't walk up to a screen, ask that screen for something, and get it back in under a second. It is a marvel. It is amazing. To them, it is normal. I remember a time when there wasn't an internet. It was cold and dark and boring. Go Luddites! I wrote about steampunk, man. I know all about Luddites. But the things that generation creates, and that's why I spend a lot of time in schools and a lot of time with younger students, they are unencumbered by the past. The ideas that they come up with are crazy and silly and brilliant. So the reason why I said I wanted to take this book and think about, for 21st Century Robot, to dedicate the book to anybody born after 2014 is that they would be the first generation that would never know a time when you couldn't imagine, design, build, and program their own robot. What will those robots do? What will they print? That's really our job. And even for you young folks in here who are just getting out, they're your responsibility. They are the ones who are going to build the future as much as you. So you need to go out and build your future, and you'll be prepared here to do it. And also, it's a really interesting place being here in Vermont and being here in Burlington, because it is the intersection of the heritage of the past of your agriculture and gigabit and the makerspaces of the future. It's this interesting intersection. But it's your responsibility to go out to that generation and say, what's the future you want? What's the future you want to avoid? And how can I help you build it? Thank you very much. That was terrific. Thank you very much.
So am I on? I gotta warm up the machine.
I can be the robot.
Okay. It was touch and go whether to name him an honorary Champlainer, especially when he called me short timer. But I guess we'll let him have it. So you are now an honorary Champlainer.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. It's an honor. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
For coming. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the evening. Keep your eye on Champlain. We are part of the future.